The first time my brother called me a lowly cashier at Thanksgiving dinner, he did it with a smile on his face. That was the part that hurt the most. He was sitting at the head of our mother's long dining table, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my rent, while I stood near the doorway with a paper plate in my hand, trying to decide whether I should even stay long enough for dessert. He looked at me like I was something the family had accidentally tracked in from the street. "Come on, Lily," Brandon said, leaning back in his chair as his wife laughed into her wine glass. "Don't make that face. We're all just joking. You're the one who insisted on working retail. Some people build companies. Some people ring up canned cranberries." A few people chuckled. Not because it was funny, because they were scared of him. My mother gave him a warning look, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of look that says, "Please don't embarrass me in front of everybody. Not please stop being cruel to your sister." I set my plate down so carefully it felt like I was placing a wound on the table. I was about to say something I would have regretted, something sharp and ugly, when the front door opened and a cold rush of air swept through the house. Everyone turned. A woman stepped inside holding a leather folder against her chest. She was dressed in a charcoal coat, her dark hair pulled back neat and severe, and she looked around our dining room like she had walked into a board meeting instead of Thanksgiving dinner. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floor, and every sound in the room seemed to stop around them. "Sorry, I'm late," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, and completely unbothered by the 6 stunned faces staring back at her. Then her eyes found mine. "Miss Hart? I'm Nora Caldwell. I'm your assistant. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon." My brother frowned. "Excuse me?" Nora barely glanced at him. She opened the folder and lifted a stack of documents. "I'm here with the deed." The room went so still that I could hear the ice cracking in somebody's drink. My mother blinked. "The what?" Nora looked at me again. "The original deed and the transfer papers. The title is finally cleared. The company is officially yours." Brandon actually laughed. It was short and ugly. "There's no company that belongs to Lily. She works at a register." Nora did not even smile. She placed the documents on the table, right between the mashed potatoes and the cranberry sauce, as if she were setting down a verdict. "I'm aware of where your sister works now," she said. "I'm also aware of what she owns." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only thing in the room that seemed alive was the tiny candle in the center of the table, flickering like it wanted to run. And right then, standing there in my plain black sweater and shoes that had already started to hurt, I realized 2 things at once. First, my family had no idea who I really was. Second, they were about to find out. 2 years earlier, I had stood in the same house and listened to Brandon tell everyone that I was wasting my life. Back then, I worked in accounting at our family company, Hartwell Foods. It was the business my grandfather built from nothing after coming home from the service with a busted knee and a stubborn mind. He started with 1 delivery truck and a rented warehouse. By the time I was old enough to understand money, he had grown it into a respected regional distributor with contracts, warehouses, a payroll, and enough moving parts to keep half the county employed. When I was little, Grandpa would let me sit on a crate in the office while he counted invoices. He always called me his little shadow. He used to say I had a good head for numbers and an even better head for people, which, at the time, I thought was just something grandfathers said to make you feel important. When he got sick, I was the one who took him to appointments. I was the one who sat by his bed while the rest of the family argued over schedules and profits and who would eventually take over. I was 26, tired, and trying to keep everyone else from falling apart. Then he died. After the funeral, Brandon became the grieving son who suddenly knew everything. My mother started leaning on him because he was the oldest. My Aunt Denise started whispering that the company needed strong leadership. And I, the daughter who had spent years quietly balancing books and fixing mistakes no one else bothered to see, was told that I was being too emotional to handle serious responsibilities. A month later, money began disappearing from one of the operating accounts. Brandon blamed me before anyone had even checked the records. He stood in the office with his tie loosened, looking heartbreakingly sincere, and said, "Lily's the one who's always touching the books." I remember the way my stomach dropped. I remember turning to my mother for help and finding her eyes on the floor. By the end of that week, I was out. Not officially fired, not exactly, just pushed so far out of the room that I no longer had anywhere to stand. I took the first job I could get, which happened to be cashier work at a grocery store across town. It paid enough to keep the lights on in my tiny apartment. It gave me a reason to leave the house. It gave me a way to disappear. What my family never understood was that disappearing can be useful when you're the only one paying attention. 3 months after I left Hartwell Foods, I got a phone call from an old lawyer's office telling me that my grandfather had left behind a sealed trust and a property transfer that had never been finalized because of family interference. At first, I thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. My grandfather, the man who had built the company brick by brick, had quietly placed a controlling interest in the business and the deed to the old administrative building into a trust under my name. He had done it years earlier, right after he noticed how Brandon handled money when he thought no one was looking. Grandpa trusted me, and he had prepared for the day my family would get too greedy to stay honest. But there had been a problem. Someone inside the family had kept the paperwork buried. For months, the transfer had been delayed by missing signatures, conflicting records, and a trail of forged approvals so carefully hidden that I never would have uncovered it alone. That was when Nora came into my life. She was the junior legal coordinator at the firm handling the estate, and she had the kind of mind that never missed a detail. While everyone else at the office treated me like a sad, confused heir from a messy family, Nora treated me like a client worth protecting. She helped me gather records, compare signatures, trace missing transfers, and pull financial statements that had clearly been tampered with. When the truth finally started forming on paper, I sat in my kitchen and cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Not because I had money, because my grandfather had seen what was coming, and because my family had lied to my face for so long that I had started believing I didn't matter. Nora became my assistant once the trust was activated, and the business assets were placed under my control. She arranged the paperwork, handled the filings, and kept me from making any impulsive decisions while I tried to figure out what kind of person I was supposed to become when the people who had dismissed me no longer got to define me. I never told my family, not because I wanted to enjoy some dramatic reveal one day, but because I needed to know something first. I needed to know whether they would ever love me without needing to own me. Thanksgiving gave me my answer. That evening, after Nora arrived, Brandon was the first one to recover. He leaned forward and squinted at the papers like they had personally offended him. "That's impossible," he said. "That building belongs to the company." Nora folded her hands. "The company's headquarters sits on property that was originally deeded to your grandfather, then transferred into a trust. The controlling assets were assigned to Miss Hart. The transfer was legal, notarized, and recorded." Denise made a sharp little sound of disbelief. "This is some kind of stunt." Nora opened another page. "Actually, this is the audited paper trail showing that for the last 4 years, the company has been operating out of a property it no longer had a legal claim to. I'm also looking at discrepancies in the operating accounts, unpaid lease obligations, and one very interesting set of internal transfers tied to Mr. Hartwell's personal accounts." Brandon's face changed. Just a little. Enough for me to see fear slide under the surface. My mother stared at him. "Brandon?" He held up both hands. "This is ridiculous. Lily put her little friend up to this." "My assistant," I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. But when I spoke again, my voice came out steady. "I didn't ask Nora to come here and embarrass anybody. I asked her to bring the documents because I was tired of hearing how useless I am." My brother scoffed, though it sounded weaker now. "You work at a grocery store." "Yes," I said. "I do. Because after you pushed me out of the company, I needed a job that paid immediately. That doesn't mean I stopped caring about what Grandpa left behind." My mother looked as if she were seeing me for the first time. "Lily, why didn't you tell me?" I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. "Tell you what, Mom? That the family business was held together by lies? That Brandon had been moving money around? That Aunt Denise knew and kept quiet because she liked being invited to lunch? You all made it very clear I was supposed to sit down, smile, and be grateful." Denise's face tightened. "Careful." "No," I said, and I surprised even myself with how much was in that one word. "You be careful." The silence that followed was heavier than the turkey on the table. Nora reached into her folder again and slid a final document toward me. This one was approved this morning, she said. The company deed was formally recorded in your name at 3:14 p.m. The advisory board has been notified. The property is now under your direct control. Brandon stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. You can't just walk in here and take everything. I met his eyes for the first time that night and felt something old and broken inside me go very still. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm taking back what was hidden from me. He pointed at the papers. You think a piece of paper makes you the boss? No, I said. The truth does. His jaw worked. He looked around the table, searching for support, and for the first time in his life, nobody rushed to give it to him. Nora cleared her throat. There is one more matter. Brandon frowned. What now? She turned a page and looked directly at him. An internal review has linked unauthorized transfers from company funds to a private account under your wife's name. The finance team is already preparing the report. His wife went pale. That wasn't what you said it would look like. Brandon whipped toward her. What are you talking about? She swallowed. You said it was just a temporary move. You said the numbers would balance out before anyone noticed. Nobody breathed. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. Denise pushed her chair back and whispered, Brandon? Tell me that's not true. For 1 second, my brother looked like a little boy who had been caught with both hands in the cookie jar. Then his face hardened. It was business, he snapped. You people wouldn't understand. There it was. The sentence that always came when men like Brandon got cornered. Business. As if stealing from your own company was just a more expensive version of ambition. I looked at the table, at the polished glasses, at the untouched rolls, at the family portrait hanging on the wall behind us where Grandpa smiled with his arm around all of us, and I felt the whole room tilt inside me. I understand, I said. You thought I would stay quiet forever. My mother's voice shook. Lily? I turned toward her. Did you know? She looked away. It was the smallest movement in the room, but it hit me harder than anything Brandon had said. My mother knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not all the details. But enough to suspect, enough to look the other way, enough to let me carry the shame while the people who truly caused the damage kept their seats at the table. When she didn't answer, I felt my eyes burn. Mom, I said, softer now, did you know? Her shoulders began to shake. I knew Brandon was handling things badly, she whispered. I knew the company was under pressure. I didn't know what to believe. He said you were angry after Grandpa died. He said you were being difficult. He said if I pushed too hard, you'd walk away from all of us. The room went still in a different way this time. Not from shock, from recognition. I had spent so long thinking I needed to prove I wasn't the problem that hearing the truth spoken out loud almost made me dizzy. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This is ridiculous. Lily can't run Hartwell Foods. She can barely manage a cash drawer. I stared at him. You really still think this is about a register? He looked at me. Confused. I took a slow breath. No one in this room ever bothered to ask how I was paying my bills on a cashier's salary while rebuilding my life. No one wondered why the legal notices kept going to my apartment. No one asked why the auditor suddenly started showing up with a full team. You laughed because it was easier than admitting Grandpa trusted me more than he trusted you. Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. Nora stepped beside me, calm as ever. Actually, Miss Hart now has full authority to dissolve current management, initiate a forensic audit, and change property access immediately. His wife looked like she might faint. Denise's mouth tightened into a thin line. My mother sank into her chair as if her bones had given up. I turned to Nora. Have the locks changed by morning? Brandon snapped. You can't do that. Yes, I said. I can. And after that? He demanded, voice rising. You're really going to throw your own family out? That question might have landed harder if he had ever treated me like family. I looked at him for a long second. I'm going to do what you should have done years ago, I said. I'm going to protect what's left. He took a step toward me, and for a brief moment I thought he might lunge. But then he saw Nora raise her phone, and the words died in his throat. That was when I understood the final twist of the night. He wasn't angry because he was innocent. He was angry because he had finally been caught. The audit that followed turned up everything. The missing transfers, the false signatures, the shell payments, the backdated approvals, The private checks written to accounts no one had admitted to knowing about. Brandon had been funneling company money to cover debts, impress investors, and patch holes in the image he had built for himself. Denise hadn't touched the money directly, but she had helped conceal the paper trail because she didn't want the family reputation damaged. My mother had seen pieces of it and prayed it would correct itself. It didn't. Nora handled the legal side with the kind of steel I was grateful not to have to develop in myself. Within days, Brandon was removed from all company authority. Within weeks, the business was under court-ordered review. The property deed was confirmed. The missing records were restored. The accounts were frozen until the investigators finished sorting through the damage. And me? For the first time in my life, I was no longer the girl everybody talked over. I was the person signing the decisions. I expected to feel powerful. Mostly, I felt sad. One rainy afternoon, almost a month later, my mother came to my apartment carrying a pie she had baked herself. She stood in my doorway like she was afraid I might slam it in her face. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words sounded like they had been scraped out of her. "I should have protected you." I let her in because I was still her daughter, and because I was tired of carrying the weight of the whole family's failures by myself. She sat at my little kitchen table, looked at the stack of files Nora had left, and cried in silence for nearly 10 minutes before she could speak again. "I let Brandon convince me you were too emotional to handle things," she said. "I told myself it was because he was grieving too. I told myself I was keeping peace." I didn't interrupt. She swallowed hard. "I wasn't keeping peace. I was avoiding truth." That was the first honest thing I had heard from her in years. I nodded once. "I know." She reached across the table, but she didn't grab my hand until I chose to let her. "Do you hate us?" The question hung between us, fragile as glass. I thought about the Thanksgiving table, about the laughter, about the way it felt to be made small by people who should have made room for me. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "But I'm done letting you break me so you can feel comfortable." Her eyes filled again. In the end, I didn't sell everything. I didn't come crashing back into the company to run it like a tyrant. That would have been easier, maybe, but it wouldn't have been justice. It would have been another kind of damage. Instead, I cleaned house. I kept the honest employees. I paid the people Brandon had ignored. I shut down the accounts that had been used like private wallets. I sold the old building my grandfather had loved and used part of the proceeds to pay back every worker who had been shortchanged. I set aside a scholarship in Grandpa's name for kids from our town who wanted business training but didn't come from money. As for Brandon, the courts did what courts do when paperwork and greed finally catch up to each other. He lost the position he thought was his birthright. He had to answer questions he had spent years avoiding. His wife left him when she realized the bills weren't going to disappear just because he said her name on them with confidence. Denise stopped calling altogether once it became clear that being family no longer protected her. That was karma, the realistic kind. Not fireworks, not screaming in the street, just consequences, arriving on time. The final Thanksgiving of that year looked nothing like the last one. We met at a smaller house, one I chose, with fewer people and no expensive theater. My mother brought the mashed potatoes. I made the rolls. Nora came, though she insisted she was only there for the pie. There was no head of the table, no forced laughter, no one trying to turn cruelty into a joke. At one point, my mother looked at me across the room and said, "You know, your grandfather would be proud of you." I almost laughed, because that was the one thing I had always hoped for, and never dared to believe. I looked down at my hands, at the hands that had rung up groceries, balanced books, signed deeds, and held my life together when nobody else cared enough to help. "I think," I said quietly, "he would have been disappointed it took me this long." Nora, standing near the counter with a slice of pie, snorted softly. My mother smiled through tears, and for the first time in years, I smiled too. Not because I won, because I finally understood that being called small by the wrong people never made me small.